While the doctor was reviewing my blood test results, she suddenly froze. Not the kind of pause where someone is thinking, but the kind where everything stops. Her hands began to shake as she pulled me out of the room, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You need to leave immediately. And whatever you do, don't tell your daughter." I asked what was wrong. She didn't answer. She simply turned the screen toward me and said, "Just look. You'll understand." What I saw on that screen shattered every belief I had. Thank you for watching. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, your city or country. Also, please note that some details in this story have been fictionalized for educational and storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is purely coincidental, but the message remains entirely true. I'll never forget that day. January 7th, 2025. The moment I walked into Dr. Foster's office that morning, I had no idea that everything I thought I knew was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. The waiting room was quiet. Too quiet. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, flipping through an old magazine. I wasn't really reading, my mind somewhere else. I'd been feeling awful for months, exhausted, nauseous, my body slowly falling apart. 3 different doctors had already told me 3 different things. One said stress, another said anemia. The third one shrugged and suggested I was just getting old. I was starting to believe them all. Dr. Foster called my name. She was a woman in her mid-50s, professional, but warm, someone I'd known for years. I'd always trusted her. I followed her back to the examination room, and she had me sit down while she pulled up my test results on her computer. The room smelled like antiseptic and old carpet, the kind of sterile environment I'd grown accustomed to after so many visits to so many different doctors. But something felt different this time. The air felt heavier. That's when I noticed her hands. They were shaking. I'd never seen Dr. Foster's hands shake before. She was the kind of doctor who had steady hands, a calm voice, the kind of presence that made you feel like everything would be okay. But as she scrolled through my blood work, her fingers trembled against the keyboard. She looked at the screen, then looked at me, then looked back at the screen again. Whatever she was seeing there had rattled her deeply. "Tupina," she said slowly. "I found something in your blood work that concerns me greatly." My stomach dropped. "What is it? Is it cancer?" "No, it's not cancer." She turned her monitor toward me. I could see numbers and measurements I didn't understand, percentages and abbreviations that meant nothing to me. "David, your blood contains arsenic." I stared at her. The word didn't make sense. Arsenic. It sounded like something from a mystery novel, something that happened to other people in other lives, not to a 60-year-old retired English teacher from Portland. Arsenic, like the poison. Yes, arsenic is a poison. And based on these levels, someone has been contaminating your system with small amounts of it for months. This isn't accidental exposure, David. Someone has been deliberately doing this to you. My vision went blurry. The room started spinning. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. That's impossible. Who would... "That's what we need to figure out," Dr. Foster said. Her voice was gentle but urgent. "David, I need to ask you something important. Who prepares your meals? Who has access to your food and drinks?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't say it. I couldn't even think it. Because the answer was someone I loved. Someone I'd brought into my home. Someone I'd given my trust to, believing that this time this relationship would heal the damage I'd done over the years. "Is there someone living with you?" Dr. Foster pressed. "Someone close to you who handles your kitchen?" I nodded slowly, but I still couldn't speak her name aloud. "Jessica, my daughter. The same daughter who had barely spoken to me for a decade, who had suddenly reappeared in my life not long ago, like an answer to a prayer I'd been too ashamed to say out loud. And now this. Dr. Foster leaned forward. David, listen to me carefully. You need to leave your house immediately. Don't confront this person. Don't let them know that you know. You need to get somewhere safe, and you need to call the police. Will you do that? I heard her words, but they felt like they were coming from very far away. Leave my house. Call the police. About who? About my daughter, the girl I'd failed when she was a child, whose mother I'd divorced, whose life I'd complicated beyond measure. It couldn't be. It made no sense. David. Dr. Foster's voice cut through the fog. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes, I whispered. Yes, I understand. She wrote down a phone number and slid it across her desk. This is Detective Marcus Johnson. He's a specialist in cases like this. I'm going to call him myself, but I need you to call him the moment you leave here. Will you promise me that... I took the number with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. The paper felt thin and fragile, like it might blow away if I breathed too hard. I nodded, but I wasn't sure I was really there anymore. The real David, the one who woke up that morning thinking life was just slowly disappointing and wearing him down, seemed to have disappeared. Someone else was sitting in this chair now. Someone who had just learned that the person he loved most in this world was slowly, methodically, deliberately trying to end his life. There's more you need to know, Dr. Foster continued. Chronic arsenic poisoning can cause severe damage to your organs. The levels we're seeing suggest this has been happening for months. You're lucky to be alive, David. You're very lucky. Lucky. The word echoed in my head. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I was drowning in the air. I left Dr. Foster's office and walked to my car like a man in a dream. The Portland morning was cold and gray, the kind of January day that makes you want to disappear into yourself. The Willamette River was somewhere in the distance, flowing toward the ocean, with no concerns about betrayal or poison or daughters who wanted their fathers dead. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of words that didn't belong together. Arsenic, poison, deliberately. Jessica. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from home. I didn't even need to look at it to know who it was. I had no idea what was waiting for me when I got home. But I knew sitting there in that cold car with Detective Johnson's phone number crumpled in my fist, that my life had just split into two parts before I knew and after, and there was no going back to the before. My name is David Blackwell. I'm 60 years old, and I've lived in Portland, Oregon for most of my adult life. I came here in 1965, fresh out of college, ready to start teaching high school English. That was my dream, to shape young minds, to make a difference in a classroom. I was passionate about it, maybe too passionate. Looking back now, I think I know exactly where things started to go wrong. I was married once. Her name was Catherine, and she was beautiful in that way that made you believe in second chances and forever. We had plans together, the kind of plans young couples make when they think time is infinite. We were going to travel. We were going to build a family. We were going to do all the things that mattered, except none of it happened the way we imagined. I fell in love with my job instead. I know how that sounds strange, even pathetic, but it's true. I was the teacher who stayed late after school, developing new curriculum grading papers until midnight. My colleagues would invite me out on Friday nights, and I'd decline. I had lesson plans to perfect. Catherine would wait for me at home with dinner getting cold, and I'd call to say I'd be late again. She asked me to change. I remember her crying at the kitchen table, her voice breaking, as she said she felt like she was married to a ghost. She wanted her husband back. She said she wanted to matter to me the way my job did. I told her I was doing it for us, for our future. I genuinely believed that at the time. I was so convincing that I almost believed my own lies. We had a daughter in 1985, Jessica. She was born on a Tuesday in March, and I held her in the hospital, thinking about all the time I was going to spend with her, all the memories we were going to make. I meant it too. I really did. But then September came and school started again. and suddenly my classroom seemed more real than my daughter. I told myself it was temporary. Once I got through this semester, once I got through this school year, once I got promoted. Once. The once never came. Catherine left me in 1997. Jessica was 12 years old. I can still see my daughter's face when Catherine told her we were getting divorced. The confusion, the hurt, the way she looked at me like she was trying to figure out who I was, as if she was meeting me for the first time and deciding she didn't like what she saw. I didn't fight hard enough to keep her in my life. I told myself I was respecting Catherine's wishes. I told myself that Jessica would be better off without the constant reminder of her father's failures. The truth was simpler and uglier than that I was ashamed. I was also relieved. No more guilt about missing her school plays. No more guilt about broken promises. The easiest thing was to let her go. I saw Jessica maybe once or twice a year after the divorce. Awkward meetings at diners where we'd run out of things to say after 20 minutes. She grew older. Her eyes grew colder. By high school, she barely looked at me. By college, I'd stopped trying altogether. I became one of those fathers you read about in stories. The absent one. The one who missed everything and rationalized every mistake. For the past 10 years, I've been living by myself in this house on the edge of Portland. I taught my last class in 2015, took my pension, and decided that the rest of my life would be about peace and quiet. No more complications, no more people to disappoint. My house became my sanctuary. I'd wake at 7, make my coffee, read the newspaper. I'd run along the Willamette River. I'd come home and make a simple dinner. I'd read until I fell asleep. Every day was predictable. Every day was exactly like the one before it. Fortunately, I still had Thomas Henderson, an old colleague who occasionally stopped by for tea and reminded me that the world outside was still moving forward. It was boring maybe, but it was safe. I told myself that was enough. That this was the life I deserved. A man who'd given up everything for a career that didn't even want him once he turned 65. A man who'd abandoned his only daughter because he was too much of a coward to face what he'd become. I thought maybe I'd live this way until I died. Quietly. Alone. Making sure I couldn't hurt anyone else because there was no one left to hurt. That's what I believed. That solitude was penance. That isolation was the price of my failures. I never imagined my daughter would come back. After all these years of silence, after all the missed birthdays and unanswered letters, I never thought Jessica would show up at my door. I never imagined she'd ask to stay with me, her voice carrying something that sounded like forgiveness, but felt like something else entirely. And I never imagined, not in a million years, that she'd come back for a reason I could never have predicted. Looking back now, I understand that sometimes the universe gives you a second chance. Sometimes life offers you an opportunity to make things right. But sometimes that second chance comes with a price so terrible that you'd give anything to go back to the comfortable, lonely life you had before. I didn't know that then. I just knew that my daughter was here. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe I had a reason to exist for something other than survival. I didn't know she was going to destroy me. I wasn't expecting her. After all those years of silence, of awkward phone calls that went nowhere, of birthdays, acknowledged with a card, and nothing more, I had stopped hoping she'd come back into my life. I'd made peace with that loss, or so I told myself. But there she was, standing on my porch in the Portland summer heat, her dark hair pulled back, a small suitcase at her feet. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. She wasn't the sullen teenager I remembered. She wasn't the angry young woman who'd stopped taking my calls. She was someone else entirely. A woman in her late 20s, composed and careful, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "But Dad," she said, that single word. Just my name, but it carried the weight of almost 2 decades. I pulled her into my arms without thinking. I didn't care that we were strangers. I didn't care that we had nothing to say to each other. All I knew was that my daughter had come home and something inside me that had been broken for a very long time suddenly felt like it might heal. "Jessica," I breathed into her hair. "I can't believe you're here." She held me for exactly the right amount of time, long enough that it seemed genuine, short enough that it didn't seem desperate. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "Can I come in, Dad?" she asked. Of course she could come in. She could stay forever as far as I was concerned. We sat in my living room, and I asked her the obvious question. "What brings you here? Is everything okay?" Jessica took a moment before answering. "My marriage fell apart," she said quietly. "Paul and we just couldn't make it work. He's involved with someone else, and I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I needed to get away. I needed to remember what it felt like to be somewhere I was wanted." The way she said that last part, "somewhere I was wanted," it hit me like a punch. Because it was true. I hadn't wanted her. I'd pushed her away through my indifference and my absence, and now here she was giving me a chance to make it right. "You can stay here as long as you need," I told her. "This is your home too." Jessica smiled again, and I remember thinking how grateful I felt that she was giving me this opportunity. How grateful I felt that she was trusting me after everything. "Thank you, Dad," she said. "I was hoping you'd say that." She moved into my guest room that same afternoon. I helped her bring in a few boxes and suitcases, not much. Apparently she'd left most of her life behind in Seattle. By that evening, she was already in my kitchen making tea, moving around the space like she belonged there. Like she'd never left. For the first time in 10 years, my house didn't feel empty. I remember thinking that maybe God was giving me a second chance. Maybe after all the years of failure and regret, the universe was finally offering me an opportunity to be the father I should have been all along. Maybe Jessica was finally ready to forgive me. She was so attentive that first week. She'd ask how my day was. She'd suggest we watch movies together in the evening. She'd make me breakfast before I went for my morning run. She seemed genuinely interested in my life, genuinely happy to be here. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when I'd catch her watching me with an expression that didn't match the warmth in her voice. Her eyes would go distant and cold, like she was looking through me rather than at me. And then she'd blink, and that expression would vanish, replaced by a smile so perfect it seemed rehearsed. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself it was just the strangeness of having someone else in the house after so long. I told myself it was my guilt making me see shadows where there were none. But looking back now, I realize I should have paid more attention to those moments. I should have noticed that there was something calculated about the way she moved through my life. Something deliberate about every gesture, every word, every carefully timed smile. I didn't know what she was really planning. I didn't understand that the woman smiling at me from across my kitchen table had come back for reasons I couldn't have imagined. Reasons that had nothing to do with reconciliation, and everything to do with something far darker. But I would learn soon enough. 2 months after Jessica arrived, something was wrong with me. I didn't notice it all at once. It crept in slowly like a fog rolling in from the coast, so gradual that I almost didn't see it happening. But one morning in mid-September, I woke up and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt normal. The exhaustion was the first thing. Not the kind of tiredness you shake off with a cup of coffee and a good night's sleep. This was different. This was a bone-deep weariness that made even the simplest tasks feel impossible. Getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. Showering left me breathless. By mid-afternoon, I'd find myself sitting in my living room, staring at nothing, unable to muster the energy to move. Jessica noticed immediately. She'd come find me on the couch, already concerned, already asking if I was feeling okay. "Maybe you should see a doctor, Dad," she'd suggest gently. "This doesn't seem normal." But I told myself it was just getting older. 60 isn't young anymore. My body was probably just reminding me of that fact. I tried to push through it. Then came the nausea. Constant. Relentless. It would hit me in waves throughout the day, especially in the mornings. I'd be fine one moment, and the next, my stomach would be churning, and I'd barely make it to the bathroom. I stopped eating breakfast. I could barely get through lunch. By dinner, I'd have no appetite whatsoever. Jessica started preparing these elaborate meals, salads, soups, things she said would be easy on my stomach. "You need to eat something, Dad," she'd insist, watching me carefully as I picked at whatever she'd made. "You're wasting away." I'd force down a few bites to make her happy, but it never stayed down for long. My head started hurting too. A constant dull ache that lived behind my eyes like someone was pressing their thumbs against my temples from the inside. I tried over-the-counter painkillers. They didn't help. I tried sleeping more. That didn't help either. The headaches would wake me in the middle of the night, and I'd lie there in the darkness, wondering what the hell was happening to my body. But the hair loss, that's what finally scared me. I first noticed it in the shower. A few strands more than usual wrapped around my fingers as I shampooed. I didn't think much of it. People lose hair all the time. Then, a few days later, I found clumps on my pillow when I woke up. Actual clumps tangled in the fabric like something was seriously, fundamentally wrong. I started paying attention after that. Every time I brushed my hair, more came out. Every time I ran my hands through it, I'd feel the resistance, the pull, and then the strands would slip away between my fingers. It was happening faster now. Noticeably, I could see the thinning at my temples, the way my hairline seemed to be retreating. That's when I knew something was genuinely wrong. Not just stress, not just old age catching up with me. Something was actually happening inside my body, and I had no idea what it was. Jessica drove me to the doctor's office that Friday morning in mid-September. She was attentive, solicitous, asking me questions about my symptoms as we drove through Portland's gray morning traffic. She seemed genuinely concerned. She held my hand in the waiting room. She came back into the examination room with me taking notes on her phone about what the doctor said, nodding along with an expression of perfect worry. I remember thinking how lucky I was, how grateful I was that my daughter cared about me this much. How maybe after all those years of distance, we were finally becoming close. She smiled the entire drive home. Not the careful smile she'd perfected over the summer, but a real smile. Wide and genuine looking. Content. I chalked it up to her relief that we were finally getting answers. I figured she was happy that I was taking my health seriously. I told myself her happiness was about caring for her father. But looking back now, I wonder if that smile meant something else entirely. I wonder if she was pleased because her plan was working exactly the way she'd intended. I wonder if everything, the meals she prepared, the vitamins she suggested, the concerned way she watched me deteriorate, was all part of something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I didn't know that all these symptoms were connected. I didn't know that someone in my own house was methodically, carefully, deliberately introducing something into my body that was slowly poisoning me from the inside out. I only knew that I felt like I was dying, and I had no idea why. I saw 3 different doctors over the next 6 weeks, desperate for someone to tell me what was happening to my body. The first one was Dr. Henry Walsh. He was in his 60s, the kind of doctor who listened politely to your symptoms and then told you exactly what you wanted to hear. After listening to me describe the exhaustion, the nausea, the constant headaches, he nodded and said, "You just need rest, David. Your body's telling you it's tired. Take some time off work. Sleep more. You'll feel better soon." He ran some basic blood work. Everything came back normal. "See," he said, as if normal results meant I wasn't actually suffering. "You're fine. Just stressed." I wasn't fine. 2 weeks later, I was sitting across from Dr. Michael Torres, a younger physician who seemed more thorough. He listened to my symptoms again, asked more detailed questions, examined me more carefully. After poking and prodding, he suggested something different. "You might be anemic," he said, studying my pale face. "That would explain the fatigue and the dizziness. It would explain the headaches, too." He ordered more tests, more blood work. I held on to his words like they were a life raft. Finally, someone had a theory that made sense. The tests came back normal. No anemia. Dr. Torres seemed puzzled. He prescribed some iron supplements anyway, just in case, and told me to follow up in a few weeks if things didn't improve. I took the supplements. Things didn't improve. By late November, I was desperate enough to see a third doctor. Dr. James Mitchell worked at a practice across town. He was older than the other two, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that made me want to trust him. When I told him my story, the months of symptoms, the other doctor's findings, the complete lack of improvement, he leaned back in his chair and nodded thoughtfully. "I think what you're experiencing," he said carefully, "is anxiety, stress-induced illness. Your mind is convincing your body that something is wrong, and your body is responding accordingly. It's quite common, especially in people your age. Loss of purpose after retirement, loneliness, fear of mortality, these things can manifest physically." He prescribed an antidepressant and recommended I see a therapist. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him I wasn't making this up, that I wasn't some lonely old man imagining illness to fill the void in my life. But I didn't. I just nodded, filled his prescription, and left his office feeling more defeated than when I'd arrived. Throughout all 3 appointments, Jessica was there. Every single one. She'd sit in the waiting room or come back into the examination room with me taking detailed notes on her phone about what each doctor said, what tests they ordered, what medications they prescribed. She'd nod along with the doctors, her expression a perfect blend of concern and attentiveness. "Ma, don't worry, Dad," she'd say afterward. "We'll figure this out. One of these doctors will find the answer." But they hadn't, and I was running out of places to look. At home, Jessica continued to care for me with meticulous attention. She made me meals, always making sure I ate something even when the nausea made it nearly impossible. She'd prepare tea in the afternoons, fresh juice in the mornings. She kept a careful log of my symptoms, noting when my headaches were worst, when my energy was lowest, what I'd eaten that day. It helps to keep track. She'd explain when I asked why she was so methodical about it all. "Maybe we'll find a pattern." There was a pattern, but neither of us understood what it was. One evening in late November, after I'd returned from my 3rd doctor's visit, Jessica found me sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. I was defeated. 3 doctors. 3 different diagnoses. All of them wrong, all of them useless. "You should just stay home and rest, Dad," Jessica said softly, sitting beside me. "Maybe these doctors are right. Maybe you just need time to heal. You're pushing yourself too hard, trying to find answers that aren't there. Just let yourself rest." I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. I stopped scheduling doctor's appointments. I stopped looking for answers. I told myself that maybe Jessica was right, that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, that maybe all I needed was time and patience and my daughter's care. I didn't know I should have kept searching. I didn't know that the answers I needed weren't going to come from therapy or antidepressants or rest. I didn't know that while 3 well-meaning doctors were telling me I was stressed and anxious, something far more sinister was happening inside my body. I would have to wait many more months of continued deterioration, months of deepening mystery, before I finally learned the truth. Jessica became the perfect daughter. Every morning, without fail, she'd be in the kitchen before I even woke up, and the smell of fresh coffee would drift into my bedroom like an invitation to something better. I remember thinking how much had changed between us. After all those years of silence, of missed birthdays and holidays spent alone here, she was making me coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Good morning, Dad," she'd say, appearing in my doorway with a steaming mug in her hands. Her smile was warm, genuine, or at least that's what I told myself. "I made this fresh. Drink it while it's hot." I never let that cup out of my sight once she handed it to me. There was something about receiving it directly from her hands that felt intimate, like a moment of real connection after so many years apart. She'd stand there watching me take that first sip, and I'd see something flicker across her face. Satisfaction, maybe concern, I wasn't sure anymore. My judgment felt cloudy, wrapped in a fog that the coffee never quite cleared. By late November, Jessica had taken over the kitchen completely. She was always there, moving between the counter and the stove, preparing meals with precision that felt almost obsessive. But I interpreted it as love. She cared about me so much that she wanted everything perfect: the timing of meals, the temperature of my coffee, the ingredients in every dish. She kept detailed notes in a leather journal, jotting down what I ate, when I slept, how I was feeling. It seemed thorough. Now looking back, I wonder what she was really tracking. "How are you feeling today, Dad?" she'd ask, watching me with those dark eyes that could shift from warm to cold in an instant. "Better." I'd lie because the exhaustion never really left. It just settled deeper into my bones. Paul called constantly. Jessica's ex-husband seemed agitated, almost desperate to speak with her. I could hear his voice coming through her phone sometimes, tinny, urgent, confused. He wanted her to come home. There were things they needed to discuss. But Jessica would shake her head, her voice taking on that practiced tone of filial devotion. "My dad needs me right now," she'd tell him, glancing over at me. "He's been so sick. I can't leave him." The sincerity in her voice was almost convincing. Paul would argue, would plead sometimes, but eventually he'd accept it. What choice did he have? His ex-wife was taking care of her ailing father. In his world, that probably made her seem noble, selfless even. But I was starting to notice things. Small things that didn't quite add up. The way she'd position herself between me and the kitchen door, as if controlling what went in and out. The way she'd wait for me to finish my coffee before clearing the cup, studying it almost clinically before washing it. The way certain foods would appear on the table, foods she insisted would help me feel better, and then mysteriously disappear from the pantry after I ate them. And always, there was that coffee in the morning, warm and welcoming and impossible to refuse without hurting her feelings. I told myself I was being paranoid. The doctors had already ruled out anything serious. It was just stress, just anxiety, just the accumulation of getting older. Jessica was being wonderful. She was being the daughter I'd always hoped she'd be. Why couldn't I just accept that? December arrived and my health seemed to plateau into a strange stasis. I wasn't getting worse, but I wasn't getting better either. It was as if I was trapped in this middle ground, suspended between sickness and health, never quite able to cross back to the person I used to be. My hair continued to fall out in alarming quantities. My nausea would come in waves, usually a few hours after meals. My headaches were constant, a dull throb that had become my normal. Jessica adjusted her routine accordingly. She started making me smoothies, nutrient-dense, she called them, packed with everything my struggling body needed. Berries, protein powder, vitamins, greens. She'd blend them with precision, and I'd drink them down, grateful for her attention. "You're going to get better, Dad," she'd whisper almost to herself as she watched me drain the glass. "I'm going to make sure of it." The irony of that statement haunts me now. Paul eventually stopped calling as frequently. Jessica had worn him down with her excuses, her explanations about how devoted she needed to be to her father's care. He seemed to accept that their marriage was over, that he'd lost her to filial duty. I wonder now if he suspected something, if there was some instinct telling him that Jessica's priorities had shifted in a way that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with something darker, something deliberate. But by then it was too late to ask him. By the end of December, I had stopped thinking about calling another doctor. Jessica's presence, her care, her constant attention, it had become a kind of anesthetic. It was easier to believe that she loved me than to consider the alternative. Easier to drink the coffee, eat the meals, take the smoothies, and trust that everything would eventually get better. I didn't know what was really happening in that kitchen, and she wasn't about to tell me. Paul didn't know either. But unlike me, he was starting to wonder about his own health, about the strange pattern of sickness that had started after spending time here. Unlike me, he was beginning to ask questions. He just didn't know what he was really looking for. On December 20th, 2024, Paul got sick. I remember because Jessica mentioned it casually over breakfast, like it was nothing. She was pouring me my usual morning coffee when she said it, her expression unchanged, her movements precise. "Paul called," she said. "He thinks he picked up some kind of flu. He's in bed now. Fever and everything." I nodded, only half listening. By that point, I'd grown accustomed to Paul's presence on the periphery of our lives. A ghost from Jessica's past, who occasionally texted or called, trying to hold on to something that was clearly gone. His illness seemed like the kind of ordinary thing that happened to people in the middle of winter. Nothing unusual, nothing worth dwelling on. But then Paul called me directly. "And David," he said, and I could hear the strain in his voice, something underneath the surface that wasn't just about being sick. "I need to talk to you about something." "What's wrong?" I asked, though the exhaustion in my own body made it hard to sound concerned about anyone else's problems. "Did you notice?" Paul said. "Did you notice that my symptoms, they're exactly like yours?" I hadn't, actually. But as soon as he said it, I couldn't unhear it. The fever, the nausea, the weakness that made even standing feel like climbing a mountain. The headaches that wouldn't quit. It was like looking at a mirror image of my own suffering, but compressed into a week instead of spread across months. "Probably just going around," I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to my own ears. "Maybe," Paul said. "But David, I need to tell you something. Something I realized while I was sick." I waited. Through the phone, I could hear him breathing like he was gathering courage for whatever came next. "The first time I got sick," Paul continued slowly, "Jessica made me coffee. She brought it to me in bed, said it would help me feel better. I drank it. I felt terrible for 3 days, then it passed." He paused and I heard him swallow. "Then about a week later, I was fine. But then I got sick again. Second time. Different symptoms, similar severity. And you know what happened? Jessica made me coffee again. Brought it right to me, said it would help with the fever." I felt something cold settle into my chest. It wasn't a thought yet, more like a feeling, a sensation of wrongness spreading through my body like the illness itself. Well, I said carefully, "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying," Paul's voice grew quieter, more deliberate, "that both times I got sick, the pattern was the same. I'd be fine. I'd spend time here at your place. Jessica would make me coffee. Then I'd be in bed for days with fever and nausea. Then I'd recover. Then it would happen again." My mind was moving slowly like it was wading through thick water. The coffee. Every morning, that warm mug appearing in my hands, fresh and inviting. Jessica always hovering nearby, watching me drink it. The kitchen where she spent hours every day. The smoothies. The meals she'd prepared with such meticulous care. "That doesn't mean anything," I said, but I didn't believe it. "Doesn't it?" Paul said. "David, I came back to visit you last week. Remember, I was fine when I arrived. But by the second day after Jessica made me coffee, I started feeling off. By the third day, fever again. I went home to recover, and I'm just now starting to feel like myself again." The weight of his words hung between us like something physical. "You think—" I started, then stopped. I couldn't even say it out loud. "I don't know what to think," Paul said, and I heard genuine confusion in his voice mixed with something darker. "I just know that every single time I've consumed something Jessica made for me, I've ended up sick. And I know that you've been sick for months. I know that she's been taking care of you. I know that she controls what you eat and drink." I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend her, to explain that Jessica loved me, that she was devoted to my recovery, that I was being paranoid and unfair. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself looking back over the past month and a half, really looking, not just accepting what I saw on the surface. The coffee every morning, the way she'd watch me drink it, the way she kept detailed notes about everything I consumed and how I felt afterward. The smoothies that appeared when I was at my weakest, the meals prepared with such precision that they felt almost clinical. And Paul calling me now, his voice carrying the weight of the same realization I was having. "I don't want to believe it either," Paul said quietly. "But I had to tell you. I had to say it out loud to someone, because if I'm right, if what I'm thinking is actually true, then..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. "Then what?" I asked anyway. "Then you need to be very, very careful," Paul said. "Because if the pattern I'm seeing is real, then whatever is happening to us isn't accidental. It isn't coincidence. It's deliberate. It's intentional." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my bedroom, listening to the sounds of Jessica moving around the kitchen downstairs. The clink of dishes, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft padding of her footsteps on the tile floor. Ordinary sounds. Domestic sounds. The sounds of a devoted daughter taking care of her sick father. But now they sounded different. Now they sounded ominous, purposeful, wrong. I stared at the empty coffee mug on my nightstand, trying to convince myself that I was being ridiculous, that Paul was seeing connections that didn't exist, that my own mind weakened by illness was making me paranoid and irrational. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was finally beginning to see what had been happening all along. Something was terribly wrong here, and I was going to have to figure out exactly what it was. By December 28th, I felt like I was dying. That's not hyperbole. That's not the exaggeration of a sick man looking back on dark times with the clarity of hindsight. That's the simple, unvarnished truth of what those days felt like. Like my body was slowly shutting down, system by system, moment by moment. Each one bringing me closer to a threshold I was terrified to cross. My fever had climbed to 103 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly 39.4 degrees Celsius. I couldn't lift myself out of bed anymore. The weight of my own body had become unbearable, like I was pinned beneath something massive and immovable pressing down on me with relentless, suffocating force. I could barely think. The fog that had been creeping into my mind for months had transformed into something thicker, more suffocating, more complete. It was like swimming through concrete. My thoughts would start and then dissolve before I could complete them, fragmenting into nothing before they reached any kind of resolution. Time moved strangely. Hours felt like minutes, and minutes felt like hours. I existed in this strange liminal space where nothing quite made sense anymore, where reality seemed to shift and bend according to rules I couldn't understand. Jessica appeared in my doorway on the afternoon of the 28th with a glass of fresh orange juice. The condensation on the glass caught the pale winter light coming through my window, creating little prisms of refraction across her face. The juice inside was a brilliant orange, almost luminous in its vividness. The kind you get from a commercial juicer, fresh squeezed, expensive. The kind a devoted daughter would make for her ailing father. The kind a daughter would make if she actually cared about his recovery. "Dad, you need to stay hydrated," she said, her voice carrying that practiced note of concern that had become her default setting over the past 6 weeks. "This will help you feel better. I made it fresh this morning." I didn't question it. I didn't think about Paul's warnings or the pattern he'd so carefully described over the phone. My mind wasn't capable of that level of analysis anymore. Thinking required energy, and I had none left. I simply accepted the glass and drank. The juice was cold and sweet and slid down my throat like relief, like mercy, like exactly what my failing body needed in that moment. Within hours, my fever spiked higher than it had ever been before. I began having nightmares so vivid and terrifying that I couldn't distinguish them from reality. I'd wake up gasping for air, my heart racing, my entire body drenched in sweat, so profuse that my sheets were soaked through. In one nightmare, Jessica stood at the foot of my bed, But her face kept changing, young, then old, then something else entirely, something not quite human. I tried to speak to her, to ask her what was happening, to beg her to help me, but no words came out. My mouth opened and closed soundlessly while she watched me with those dark, unreadable eyes. There were moments when I'd look at Jessica and not quite recognize her, not because I was confused about who she was in some clinical sense, but because something about her seemed fundamentally wrong, like I was seeing her through a distorted lens, or like she was someone I'd never actually known at all. She'd bring me water, and I'd stare at her hands holding the glass and wonder who she really was, what her motivations actually were. Why she seemed so calm in the face of my deterioration. My body was failing. That's the only way to describe it with any accuracy. It wasn't just the fever anymore. It was the complete and utter collapse of my physical being, the systematic breakdown of every system that kept me alive and functional. Every muscle ached with a deep, bone-level pain that radiated through my entire frame. My joints felt like they were grinding against each other with every tiny movement. My skin was hypersensitive. Even the weight of the bedsheet felt like torture, like tiny daggers pressing against my flesh. I'd lie there in the darkness, waiting for the next wave of nausea, the next spike in temperature, the next moment of disorientation that would pull me away from whatever fragile grip on consciousness I still maintained. Every breath was an ordeal. Each inhalation felt like drawing fire into my lungs, like breathing in broken glass mixed with ash. Each exhalation was a small victory, a moment of relief that lasted only seconds before the pain returned, before the next breath became necessary, and torture resumed. I'd lie there counting breaths sometimes, trying to establish some kind of rhythm that might bring me closer to sleep, to unconsciousness, to anything but this relentless, unforgiving suffering. My hands shook constantly now. The tremor had started days ago but had gotten progressively worse. When Jessica helped me drink water or juice, I could see the involuntary quivering in my own fingers, the loss of control that terrified me in ways I couldn't articulate. I'd try to steady myself to appear stronger than I felt, but it was pointless. My body was betraying me in every possible way, in every conceivable moment. The days blurred together into an undifferentiated mass of pain and fever and confusion. I couldn't tell you what day it was, what time of day it was, or how long I'd been in this state. It felt like forever. It felt like I'd always been sick, like I'd never known anything else, like there was no world outside of this bed, this fever, this endless cycle of suffering, interrupted only by brief moments of reprieve that never quite lasted long enough. Jessica kept bringing me things throughout the week. Orange juice, fresh and cold. Water sometimes with ice, sometimes room temperature. Smoothies that she insisted would help my body fight off whatever infection was ravaging me. Broths that she'd prepared with meticulous care, timing each ingredient perfectly. I consumed them all because I didn't have the energy to refuse, because refusing would require conversation, and conversation required energy and mental clarity I didn't possess. "You need to drink more," she'd say, her voice patient, almost musical in its cadence. "Your body needs fluids to fight this off, Dad. You're dehydrating." I'd nod weakly and drink. What else was there to do? I was completely dependent on her now, completely at her mercy. She controlled everything: what I ate, what I drank, when I slept, whether I got help or remained isolated in this bed. By January 5th, I had reached a point where I couldn't take care of myself anymore. I couldn't get to the bathroom without Jessica's physical assistance. Her arm around my waist. Her voice in my ear telling me to take small steps to breathe through the dizziness. I couldn't change my sheets by myself. I couldn't shower. I couldn't even brush my teeth without her help. My entire existence had been reduced to this singular reality, lying in bed, waiting for the next glass of something to drink, waiting for the fever to break, waiting for relief that never quite came, enduring each moment as it arrived. I had a profound sense that something catastrophically wrong was happening. Not just to my body, something deeper, something darker, something that went beyond simple illness or seasonal flu. There was an intentionality to this suffering that I couldn't quite articulate, a sense that I wasn't just passively experiencing sickness, but that I was actively being pushed toward something, toward death maybe, toward the end of something. I couldn't quite complete the thought, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface of my consciousness, like something dangerous and sharp. I couldn't think anymore. My mind had become too foggy, too compromised, too overwhelmed by the physical agony of simply existing. All I wanted was for it to stop. All I wanted was to slip into sleep and never wake up. All I wanted was an end to the relentless, unforgiving torment of being trapped in a body that was systematically, incrementally, inexorably failing. I didn't know it yet, but I was running out of time, and someone was counting down those final moments with satisfaction. I was still in bed. My fever had finally broken sometime during the night, leaving me drenched in sweat and weak in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. My mind was clearer than it had been in days, though, and I was desperately trying to piece together fragments of the past week memories that felt more like fever dreams than actual events. I just managed to sit up when my phone rang. Paul's voice came through, and immediately I could hear something in his tone that demanded my attention. I'm sick again. Those 4 words hit me like a physical blow. Again, I managed to ask, my voice hoarse from days of disuse. Yeah, high fever, nausea, weakness, the whole thing. It's exactly like the last time, David. Exactly like what happened to you. Paul paused, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. There's something we need to talk about. I listened as Paul recounted the pattern once more, but this time with the urgency of someone who'd been connecting dots and didn't like the picture they were forming. He'd been sick twice before, once in late December, once a week later. He'd recovered both times, only to get hit again now. The first time I got sick, Paul said slowly, methodically, like he was reading from notes he'd made, Jessica brought me coffee. She made it fresh, said it would help me feel better. I drank it, and within hours I was burning up with fever. Okay, I said, though a chill was running down my spine. The second time, same thing. Paul continued. I was fine when I got there. By the next morning, Jessica had made fresh coffee. I drank it. By afternoon, fever. By evening, I was in bed. My mind was moving now slowly, but with increasing clarity. Connections were starting to form, pieces that had been scattered across months, suddenly aligning into a pattern I couldn't ignore. Paul, I said carefully, is there something in that coffee? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I don't know, Paul finally said. But David, it tastes wrong, really wrong. Not like normal coffee. There's an aftertaste, something metallic and bitter underneath the usual flavor. I noticed it both times, but I was so sick so fast that I didn't have time to think about it. That's when something shifted inside me. All the fog that had been clouding my thinking since December suddenly lifted. Every morning, every single morning for weeks, Jessica bringing me that perfectly prepared cup of coffee. The way she'd watch me drink it. The way I'd get worse, not better, despite her devoted care. Paul, I need you to do something for me, I said, my voice suddenly steady in a way it hadn't been in days. What? Check if there's any coffee left from this morning. Any that Jessica made. See if you can find it. I heard rustling, the sound of Paul moving through his apartment. A few minutes passed that felt like hours. Then his voice came back tight with something that might have been fear. David, I found some. It's in the kitchen in the carafe. I hadn't dumped it out yet. What does it smell like? I asked. Like coffee, but also like something else. Something chemical almost. Sweet, but also wrong. Like there's something mixed into it that shouldn't be there. Everything suddenly made sense. The months of unexplained illness. The way my symptoms never quite matched any standard diagnosis. The way I'd get marginally better only to get worse again. Jessica always in the kitchen. Jessica always watching. Jessica always bringing me that perfectly prepared coffee. I'll certainly say slowly, every morning for the past 2 months, Jessica has made me coffee. And I've been getting sicker, not better. She told me it would help. She said I needed to stay hydrated, needed to drink more fluids, needed to trust her care. Oh God, Paul breathed. David, you don't think... I interrupted, my voice steadier now than it had been in weeks, that someone has been poisoning us, deliberately, systematically, and she's been doing it the entire time. The words hung in the air between us like a confession, like a truth that was too terrible to be anything but real. We need to keep that coffee, I said. Don't touch it. Don't dump it out. We need to have it tested. Tested for what? Paul asked, though I think he already knew the answer. For whatever she's been putting in it, I said. Whatever she's been feeding us every single morning. After we hung up, the weight of what I'd just articulated crashed down on me. My own daughter. The girl I'd raised. The girl I'd felt guilty about abandoning, the girl who'd come back into my life claiming she needed me. She'd been slowly, methodically destroying me. But there was also something else. Something that cut even deeper. If she was willing to poison Paul, poison me, then she'd been planning this. This wasn't a sudden decision. This wasn't something born out of momentary anger or temporary madness. This was premeditated. This was calculated. This was the culmination of months of careful, deliberate action. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I needed to find out the truth. I lay in bed on January 6th and thought about something unthinkable. Could my own daughter do this to me? The phone call with Paul was still fresh in my mind. Everything he'd told me replayed over and over. The pattern, the coffee, the sickness that appeared and disappeared with perfect timing. I had a full day to think about it, a day to process the terrible reality of what I now knew. I didn't want to believe it. Every instinct I had as a father screamed against the very idea. She was my child. I'd changed her diapers. I'd taught her to read. I'd been absent from her life, yes. But that didn't make her a murderer. That didn't make her capable of deliberately, methodically destroying me. But the evidence was there. Not theoretical, not circumstantial. Real. I lay there in the quiet of my bedroom with nothing but my thoughts, and I began to reconstruct everything. Every conversation, every action, every moment over the past 2 months that had seemed innocent at the time, but now took on an entirely different meaning. Jessica always in the kitchen. That wasn't devotion. That was control. That was access. Jessica always the one to bring me my coffee. Every single morning without exception. She never let me make it myself. She never suggested I try a new brand or a different preparation. She was the sole architect of that daily ritual, the gatekeeper of what went into my body. Jessica's cold eyes. I remembered them now with perfect clarity. The way they'd shift when she thought I wasn't looking. The way they'd go soft and concerned when she knew I was watching. The performance. The meticulous, calculated performance. Paul's voice on the phone, metallic and bitter. The taste he'd noticed in the coffee. Not just an off flavor. Not just something that could be explained away as a bad batch of beans or old equipment. Something deliberately added. Something foreign. Something wrong. The pattern. Paul had been sick twice after drinking Jessica's coffee. Then he got better. Then he came back to our house. Then Jessica made him coffee again. Then he got sick again. The cycle was too perfect, too consistent, too deliberate to be anything but intentional. And me, months of illness, months of getting worse instead of better, months of that perfect coffee appearing in my hands every single morning, warm and welcoming and impossible to refuse, without hurting my devoted daughter's feelings. All the pieces fit together perfectly. Like a puzzle where every edge aligned, where nothing was missing, where the final image was undeniable. I thought about the way Jessica had looked at me when I was at my sickest, during those final days of December, when I could barely lift myself out of bed. There had been something in her gaze that I'd mistaken for concern, but which I now recognized as something else entirely. Satisfaction, maybe. Anticipation. The look of someone watching their plan unfold exactly as intended. I thought about the life insurance policy. Had she taken one out, I didn't know. I had no way of knowing. But if she was planning this the way it seemed she was, then money would be the motivation. Money and something deeper resentment maybe for all the years I'd been absent. Rage at being abandoned by her father. A desire for revenge wrapped in the guise of devotion. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My daughter wasn't coming back to reconcile with me. She'd come back to kill me. I had to move. I had to act. And I had to do it carefully because she was still in this house. She was downstairs right now, probably in the kitchen, probably preparing something else for me to consume. I reached for my phone with trembling hands and called the first clinic that came up in my search results. When a receptionist answered, I kept my voice low, urgent. I need an appointment tomorrow morning, I said. As soon as possible. Something is very wrong with me. They could fit me in at 10 a.m., just a few hours away. I hung up, and then after taking a deep breath, I made my way downstairs. I needed to see Jessica. I needed to look her in the eye and pretend that nothing had changed. I needed to perform normalcy for one more evening. She was in the kitchen, of course. She was always in the kitchen. "Good evening, Dad," she said, turning from the stove with that practiced smile. "How are you feeling today?" "Better, I hope." "Much better, actually." I lied, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I think I'm turning a corner. I'm so glad," she said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice, or at least the perfect simulation of it. "I was so worried about you." I nodded and made my way to my room. Tomorrow morning, I would go to that clinic. Tomorrow morning, I would sit down with a doctor and tell her everything. Tomorrow morning, I would begin the process of proving what I now knew to be true. But tonight, I would sleep in the same house as the woman who was trying to kill me, and I would do nothing but wait. After I hung up, I sat there in the darkness of my living room and listened to the sounds of Jessica moving around downstairs. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would have medical confirmation of what I already knew. Tomorrow, I would take the first step toward justice. I just had to survive one more night. If you're still here, comment, "I'm here." And tell me, if you were in my place, would you face the truth now? Or protect yourself first? What comes next reveals everything. Please note the next part includes some fictionalized elements for educational storytelling. If that's not for you, you may stop here. I'd called the day before, voice shaking as I told the receptionist I needed an urgent appointment. Something was very wrong. They'd squeezed me in for this morning. No waiting, no delays. When someone calls, sounding the way I had sounded, clinics find a way to make room. Dr. Margaret Foster was a woman in her mid-50s with gray streaking through her dark hair and eyes that had seen enough medical mysteries to remain unshocked by almost anything. She reviewed my blood work in silence, her eyes moving across the results with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Then her hands began to tremble. It was subtle, the kind of movement a doctor would normally try to hide, but I caught it. I saw her fingers shake slightly as she held the lab results. I saw her jaw tighten. I saw something shift in her expression, a crack in her professional composure that suggested she'd found something significant enough to rattle her. "David," she said carefully, setting the papers down on her desk and folding her hands to hide the tremor. "I found something in your blood work that concerns me greatly." I felt my stomach drop. This was it. This was the moment where suspicion became confirmation. "What is it?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Arsenic," Dr. Foster said quietly. "Chronic, low-level arsenic exposure. Someone has been poisoning you, David, over an extended period of time. Several months based on the levels I'm seeing. The world stopped, not metaphorically, literally stopped. The sound in the room seemed to disappear. The ambient hum of the air conditioning, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the distant sounds of other patients and staff in the clinic, all of it vanished. There was only silence and the thundering of my own heartbeat in my ears. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, even though I'd heard her perfectly clearly. "Arsenic," Dr. Foster repeated, and this time her voice was firmer, more professional, as if restating the diagnosis helped her regain control. "Arsenic poisoning. The symptoms you've been experiencing, the fatigue, the nausea, the hair loss, the cognitive issues, they're all consistent with chronic arsenic exposure. Someone has been poisoning me." The words felt unreal in my mouth, like I was reading them from a script rather than actually speaking them. "Yes," Dr. Foster said. She picked up her pen and began making notes on my chart, as if the act of documentation could somehow make sense of the senseless. "And I need to ask you something very important. Who prepares your food? Who has access to what you eat and drink on a daily basis?" That was when I couldn't answer, because the answer was Jessica. The answer was my daughter. The answer was the girl I'd raised. The girl I'd felt guilty about abandoning, the girl who'd come back into my life, claiming she needed me, claiming she wanted to reconcile, claiming she loved me. Dr. Foster was waiting for an answer. "Who prepares your meals?" My daughter. I finally managed to say, and the words felt like a betrayal even as I spoke them. Like by naming her, I was confirming something that part of me still didn't want to accept. Dr. Foster's expression hardened. "Your daughter has access to everything you consume." "Yes," I whispered, "and no one else." I shook my head. "Doctor!" Foster set down her pen and leaned back in her chair, studying me with an expression that mixed professional concern with something deeper, a kind of human empathy that I think she rarely had to extend to her patients. "David, I need to be very clear about this," she said. "You need to leave your house immediately. Today. Now. You cannot go back there. But. No buts!" Dr. Foster interrupted, her voice taking on an urgency that cut through my shock. "Whoever is doing this to you is doing it deliberately. That's not accidental poisoning. That's not a mistake. That's deliberate harm. And if they're willing to poison you this slowly, this methodically, they're willing to escalate. They're willing to do worse." I sat there in stunned silence, unable to process what she was saying. "You need to go to the police," Dr. Foster continued. "Tell them everything. Show them these results. Let them handle this. But first, you need to get out of that house. Do you understand me?" I nodded, but I wasn't sure I understood anything anymore. My hands were shaking as I left her office. The lab results were clutched in my trembling fingers, physical evidence of something that felt impossible. My own daughter had been poisoning me. My own daughter had been slowly, methodically, deliberately trying to destroy me. The world outside the clinic looked exactly the same as it had when I'd walked in. The same Portland streets, the same January cold, the same gray sky. But everything had changed. My entire understanding of reality had shifted on its axis. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time, just staring at the steering wheel, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything but confront the terrible truth that Dr. Foster had laid bare. My daughter, my own flesh and blood. The girl I'd felt so guilty about abandoning. She wasn't the devoted daughter coming back to reconcile with her father. She was a predator. She was calculating and cold and deliberate. She'd been planning this the entire time. And I had to decide right there in that car, in the parking lot of Dr. Foster's clinic, whether I was going to accept that truth or continue living in denial. The choice was unbearable. The truth was unbearable. But denial was no longer possible. I had to believe that my own daughter was trying to kill me, and I had to decide what I was going to do about it. I left Dr. Foster's office in the early afternoon on January 15th, and I drove home on autopilot. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My jaw was clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. Every red light felt like an accusation. Every car that cut me off felt personal. I had to force myself to breathe, to remember that I was still alive, that I still had to pretend that I didn't know my daughter was trying to kill me. I had to go home. I had to walk through that front door and look my daughter in the eye and pretend that everything was fine. I had to live a lie for as long as it took to gather enough evidence to contact the police to set a trap. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. Jessica was in the kitchen when I walked in, of course. She was always in the kitchen. That's where she did her work, where she had access to everything I consumed. She looked up from the counter where she was chopping vegetables, and her face lit up with a smile that I now understood was entirely performative. "Dad, how was your appointment with Dr. Foster?" She asked, her voice carrying just the right amount of concern, just the right amount of love. I had to work to make my face cooperate. I had to force my lips into something approximating a smile. "So great," I said, and the lie tasted like copper in my mouth. "Really great, actually. Dr. Foster says I'm recovering beautifully. My blood work is looking much better." Jessica's smile widened, but something flickered in her eyes for just a moment. A flash of something that might have been disappointment or calculation quickly suppressed. "That's wonderful, Dad," she said. "I'm so glad." She made me coffee that evening. Fresh, warm, carefully prepared, exactly the way she always did it. And I had to drink it. I had to sit at the kitchen table and watch her watch me consume the poison she'd added, and I had to tell her it was delicious. "Oh, this coffee is really good, Jessica," I said, and I heard the strain in my own voice, the way my words didn't quite sound natural. "Thank you, honey." "You're welcome, Dad," she said, and there was something almost tender in the way she said it. Or maybe that was my imagination. Maybe I was projecting onto her the capacity for tenderness that I'd convinced myself she had when she first arrived. The next 5 days were the longest of my life. Every meal became a performance. Every cup of liquid she offered me became an audition. I had to pretend to drink the orange juice she'd made for me at breakfast, had to make it look like I was consuming it while actually only getting the tiniest amount past my lips. I had to eat the soup she prepared for lunch, had to compliment the flavors and the care she'd taken in preparing it all, while my stomach twisted in knots at the thought of what might be in it. Every interaction felt like a scene from a play I'd never rehearsed and couldn't understand the lines to. She'd hug me in the mornings, and I'd feel her arms around me and think about how those same arms had been carefully measuring out poison to add to my food. Those same hands that now patted my shoulder tenderly had been deliberately, methodically destroying my body. She'd kiss me goodnight, pressing her lips against my forehead in a gesture that was supposed to represent love, and all I could taste was betrayal. All I could feel was the weight of her deception. At night, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house settling around me, and I'd think about how I was sleeping under the same roof as the person who was trying to kill me. My own daughter. The child I'd brought into this world. The girl I'd failed by being absent from her life. I wondered if that was part of her motivation. If all those years of me choosing work over her, of missing her childhood, of not being there for the important moments, if that had created this. If I'd inadvertently constructed the circumstances that led to her wanting me dead. The thought was almost unbearable. Each night felt like torture. I'd close my eyes and my mind would race with possibilities. What if I'd misunderstood Dr. Foster? What if the arsenic was from somewhere else? What if I was wrong about Jessica? But then I'd remember Paul's voice on the phone describing the metallic taste of the coffee. I'd remember Dr. Foster's trembling hands. I'd remember the pattern that was too perfect, too deliberate, too consistent, to be anything but intentional. And I'd know with absolute certainty that my daughter was a murderer, and that I was living with her, eating her food, drinking her carefully prepared beverages, and pretending that none of it was happening. By the 4th day, I felt like I was fracturing. The performance was becoming harder to maintain. My smiles felt like grimaces. My compliments sounded hollow. I caught Jessica watching me sometimes, with an expression of puzzlement, as if she couldn't quite figure out why her plan hadn't worked. As if she couldn't understand why I wasn't getting worse. She didn't know that Dr. Foster had warned me. She didn't know that I was barely consuming any of the poisoned food or drink she was offering. She didn't know that I was documenting everything, saving evidence, preparing to destroy her. By the 5th day, I knew I couldn't do this anymore. Living in this house, pretending to love my murderer, performing gratitude for the poison she was feeding me, it was tearing me apart from the inside. It was slowly destroying me in ways that the arsenic never could. I had to act. I had to end this charade. I had to stop living this lie. That evening, I waited until Jessica had gone to bed. Then I reached for my phone with trembling hands and made a call I should have made days ago. I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until Jessica had gone to bed, until the house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional settling of old wood. I sat in my car, parked in the driveway with the engine off, my phone clutched in trembling hands, and I dialed the number for the Portland Police Department. When they transferred me to the detective, I heard a voice that was calm and professional, and most importantly, didn't sound like it would dismiss me as a paranoid man seeing conspiracies in his own home. "Detective Johnson," I said, and my voice came out hoarse, broken. "My name is David Blackwell. I need to report something. I need to report a crime." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the sound of a pen being picked up, the rustling of paper. "Go ahead, Mr. Blackwell," Detective Johnson said. "What's the crime you want to report?" "My daughter," I said, and the words still felt impossible even as I spoke them. "My daughter is poisoning me. She's been poisoning me for months. She's trying to kill me." I expected skepticism. I expected him to ask probing questions designed to figure out if I was mentally unstable. I expected the kind of gentle dismissal that doctors and family members give to people whose stories seem too dramatic, too impossible to be true. Instead, Detective Johnson said, "Tell me everything." And I did. I told him about the months of illness. I told him about Paul's repeated sickness following coffee prepared by Jessica. I told him about Dr. Foster's trembling hands and the lab results showing chronic arsenic exposure. I told him about the life insurance policy that I suspected Jessica had taken out on me. I told him about the way she'd gradually insinuated herself into my life, becoming the sole person responsible for my meals and beverages. Detective Johnson listened without interrupting. And when I finished, he said something that surprised me. "I believe you. You do." The relief that flooded through me was almost overwhelming. Someone believed me. Someone official, someone with authority, someone who could actually do something about this. "I've been doing this job for 25 years, Detective Johnson said. "I've heard enough family poisoning cases to know when someone's telling the truth. The details you're providing are too specific to be fabricated. A person making this up would generalize. They'd get the medical facts wrong. You're not doing that." We talked for another hour. Detective Johnson explained what we would need to build a case. He talked about the importance of documentation, of gathering physical evidence, of creating a recorded confession, if possible. "Here's what we're going to do," he said, his voice taking on the measured tone of someone laying out a plan of action. "First, we need that coffee. I need you to carefully collect a sample of the coffee your daughter makes and preserve it. Don't drink it. Don't let anyone else drink it. Just save it in a container and keep it somewhere safe." "I can do that," I said. "Chunky." Detective Johnson continued, "We need her on record. We need her to say something that indicates her knowledge of the poisoning, or at least something that seems suspicious when combined with the other evidence. I'm going to send you a small recording device. It's easy to use. Just keep it on you when you're around her. She might notice." "She probably won't," Detective Johnson interrupted. "Most people don't expect the person closest to them to be documenting evidence against them. And even if she does notice something, As long as you're gathering the evidence legally, we can use it. Oregon is a one-party consent state, which means you can record conversations if you're a party to them. We discussed logistics. Detective Johnson explained that the recording would need to be clear enough to be admissible in court. He talked about the importance of not tipping Jessica off of maintaining the appearance of normalcy until we had enough evidence to make an arrest. Most importantly, he said, don't confront her. Don't accuse her. Don't let her know what you're doing. We need her to keep operating under the assumption that you don't know. The moment she realizes you're onto her, she might escalate or disappear. She might try to finish what she started, I said quietly. Possibly, Detective Johnson acknowledged. Which is why we're going to move quickly. I'm going to start pulling records. I'm going to find out if she took out a life insurance policy on you. I'm going to look into her financial situation, her communications, anything that might establish motive. And I'm going to coordinate with the lab to analyze that coffee sample as soon as you can get it to me. How long do you think this will take? I asked. If we're lucky, a few days, Detective Johnson said. If we're not, a couple of weeks. But Mr. Blackwell, I want to be clear about something. Once we have enough evidence, we're going to move fast. We're going to arrest her before she has time to destroy evidence or disappear. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, just breathing. The weight that had been pressing down on me for days, the weight of knowing my daughter was trying to kill me, and having no one to tell, had lifted slightly. Not completely. The danger was still there. Jessica was still in the house. The poisoning could still continue. But now I wasn't facing it alone. Now I had someone official, someone with authority and resources, someone who believed me. The next morning I went about my routine as if nothing had changed. Jessica made me breakfast. I pretended to eat it. She made me coffee. I pretended to drink it. She asked me how I was feeling, and I told her I was feeling much better. I'm so glad, she said. And I heard the disappointment underneath the words, the barely concealed frustration that her plan wasn't progressing as quickly as she'd hoped. That afternoon, when she went out to run errands, I carefully collected a sample of the coffee she'd made that morning. I poured it into a small glass container and sealed it with a lid, labeling it with the date and time. Then I hid it in a locked box in my closet. Detective Johnson sent me the recording device by courier. It was small, easily concealable, capable of capturing crystal clear audio. I practiced using it that night, testing the playback, making sure I understood how to operate it without drawing attention. I was prepared. I was ready. For the first time since I'd walked into Dr. Foster's office and learned that my daughter was poisoning me, I felt like I had some measure of control back. The nightmare was far from over. Jessica was still in the house. The arsenic was still present in my system. The danger was still immediate and real. But now I had a detective. Now I had evidence. Now I had a plan. In a few days, this would all be over. Jessica would be arrested. The truth would come out. I would finally be safe. Everything was about to change. On January 22nd, I wore the recording device hidden on my body. It was small enough to fit in my shirt pocket disguised as a pen. Detective Johnson had shown me how to use it over the phone, walking me through the simple steps: press once to start recording, press twice to stop. The battery would last for 8 hours of continuous recording. It was designed to capture audio in a 5-foot radius with crystal clarity. I was terrified it would be obvious. I was terrified Jessica would see the bulge in my pocket and ask what it was. I was terrified that somehow, through some intuition or suspicion, she would know that I was documenting her. But she didn't suspect anything. Jessica was in the kitchen. When I came downstairs that morning, of course. She was always in the kitchen now, always preparing something, always controlling what I consumed. The routine had become so familiar that it felt almost normal, which was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. "Good morning, Dad," she said, turning from the counter with that practiced smile. "How are you feeling today?" I pressed the pen once, activating the recording device. "Better," I said, and I heard the steadiness in my own voice, the way I was learning to perform normalcy. Much better, actually. Thanks to you, sweetheart. She beamed at me, and I wondered if she could see the deception in my eyes. I wondered if she could sense that everything had shifted, that I was no longer the vulnerable, sick man she'd been slowly destroying. I was now a witness, a documenter of evidence, a man working with the police to build a case against his own daughter. I made you coffee, Jessica said, holding out the familiar mug. Fresh this morning. Thank you, I said, taking the mug, but only bringing it to my lips, letting the steam rise into my face without actually drinking more than a tiny sip. I'd become expert at this deception by now. This is delicious as always. That afternoon, I steered the conversation toward the topic that Detective Johnson wanted documented. Jessica, I said carefully, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. Do you know if I have any life insurance, any policies, or anything like that? She went very still. I saw her hand pause mid-motion as she was wiping down the kitchen counter. The pause lasted only a second, but it was there. It was noticeable. It was recorded. Life insurance. She repeated, her voice suddenly careful, measured in a way it hadn't been a moment before. Yes, I said, maintaining my casual tone. I was just thinking, if something were to happen to me, I want to make sure you and Paul are taken care of. I think I should check on my policies, update them if necessary. I'm not even sure what I have anymore. Jessica set down the dishcloth and turned to face me fully. For a moment, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, calculation maybe, or frustration, that her timeline had been disrupted. Then she composed herself. I think that's a good idea, she said slowly. It's important to keep those things current. You should probably contact your financial advisor about it. The words themselves were innocent, but the tone underneath them was different. Colder, more guarded. And it was all captured on the recording device in my pocket. That evening, Detective Johnson called me while Jessica was upstairs. We've made significant progress, he said without preamble. We've been investigating the chemical company where your daughter has access to the storage area. According to their records, there have been several purchases of arsenic trioxide over the past year. The purchasing records are inconsistent with the company's actual needs. What does that mean? I asked, though I think I already knew. It means someone has been ordering extra arsenic, Detective Johnson said. And when we cross-referenced the purchase orders with employee access logs, we found that your daughter was present at the facility during each suspicious purchase. She signed off on receiving the materials. My stomach twisted. It was one thing to suspect your daughter of trying to kill you. It was another thing entirely to have physical evidence, documented proof records that couldn't be denied or explained away. There's more, Detective Johnson continued. We contacted the company's supplier, and they provided us with a detailed record of who ordered the materials and where they were delivered. The delivery address for 3 of the 5 suspicious orders matches your home address, Mr. Blackwell. 3 orders delivered to my house. 3 separate purchases of arsenic delivered directly to the place where I lived with my daughter. We also interviewed Paul, Detective Johnson said. He's agreed to provide a statement about his repeated illnesses following consumption of coffee prepared by your daughter. We have his medical records from when he was sick, and the symptoms match arsenic poisoning perfectly. So you have enough, I asked. You have enough to arrest her. We're very close, Detective Johnson said. But I want to make sure we have an airtight case. I don't want any possibility of her walking on a technicality. That recording you're making is crucial. If we can get her on tape discussing the poisoning, or at least acknowledging knowledge of it, that would seal everything. Over the next day, I continued wearing the recording device. I documented Jessica's routine. The way she prepared my meals, the way she watched me eat, the way she asked about my health with fake concern, the way she moved through the house like she owned it, like she was already planning to inherit it. I recorded a conversation where I asked her directly about the coffee, about whether she'd ever added anything unusual to it. She laughed it off, said I was being paranoid, that of course she hadn't added anything but high-quality coffee beans and filtered water. But the laugh sounded forced. The denial sounded rehearsed. And then, on the evening of January 23rd, I received a call from Detective Johnson that changed everything. "We found something," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "We obtained a warrant to search your home. We found a container of arsenic trioxide in the back of Jessica's closet, partially hidden behind boxes of old clothes. It's the same batch number as the material delivered to your address, according to the supplier's records. You found it in her closet." I repeated, unable to quite process the reality of it. Physical evidence. Concrete proof that couldn't be disputed or explained away. "Yes," Detective Johnson confirmed. "We've also secured the coffee sample you provided. We sent it to the lab for analysis, and it tested positive for arsenic. High concentrations. My legs felt weak. I had to sit down." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Detective Johnson said, "we have everything we need. We have the physical evidence, we have the recordings, we have the coffee sample, we have the purchase records. We have your testimony, Paul's testimony, and your doctor's testimony. We have Motive, the life insurance policy, which we confirmed she took out on you 6 months ago, well before the poisoning began. So you're going to arrest her?" "Tomorrow morning," Detective Johnson said. "January 24th at 6 a.m. We'll have officers at your house. We'll arrest her while she's still there. I want you to be prepared for this, Mr. Blackwell. I want you to be ready for what's about to happen." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room and listened to the sounds of my daughter moving around upstairs. Tomorrow morning, the police would come. Tomorrow morning, Jessica would be arrested. Tomorrow morning, the nightmare would finally be over. I thought about all the years I'd been absent from her life. I thought about how much damage that absence might have caused. But I also thought about how that damage, whatever it was, didn't excuse what she'd done. There was no excuse for deliberately, methodically, carefully poisoning your own father over the course of months. Tomorrow everything would end. Tomorrow my daughter would have to face justice. Tomorrow I would finally be free. On January 24th, 2025, the police arrived at my house at 6 a.m. I'd been awake since before dawn, lying in bed in the darkness, listening to the sound of Jessica moving around in her room down the hall. She had no idea what was coming. She had no idea that this was the last morning she would spend in this house as a free person. She had no idea that by the end of the day, she would be in custody, facing charges that would define the rest of her life. I heard the sirens first distant at first, then growing louder as the police cars approached my neighborhood. Then came the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up to my house doors, slamming the static crackle of police radios. Jessica must have heard it too, because I heard her door open, heard her footsteps in the hallway, heard the confusion in her movement as she tried to understand what was happening. I got out of bed slowly, deliberately. I didn't want to be there when they came for her, but I also didn't want to hide. I wanted to witness this. I wanted to see the moment when my daughter finally had to face the consequences of what she'd done. By the time I made it downstairs, Detective Marcus Johnson was already at my front door, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. He looked directly at me and nodded a gesture that seemed to say, "It's time." "Where is she?" he asked. "Kitchen," I said. We walked through my house together, and I felt like I was watching a scene from a movie, something happening to someone else, something too surreal to be actually occurring in my own home. Jessica was standing by the counter, still in her pajamas, her face a mask of confusion that was already starting to crack into something darker as she realized what was happening. Jessica Blackwell. Detective Johnson said, his voice formal and official in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. "Yes," she said, and her voice was small, uncertain in a way I'd never heard before. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy to commit homicide," Detective Johnson said, and each charge fell like a hammer blow. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand your rights? Jessica's face went white. Not just pale, completely drained of color, like all the blood had suddenly been diverted away from her head. She opened her mouth to speak, closed it again, opened it once more. I don't. She started, but her words trailed off into nothing. Do you understand your rights? Detective Johnson repeated, his voice steady and professional. Yes, Jessica whispered. One of the uniformed officers stepped forward and gently turned her around. I watched as they placed her hands behind her back and secured handcuffs around her wrists. The click, click, click of the cuffs closing sounded impossibly loud in the quiet kitchen. Jessica didn't resist. She didn't fight or scream or deny anything. She simply stood there, her body rigid, her face turned away from me, and allowed herself to be arrested. We're going to take her to the station for questioning, Detective Johnson said to me. There will be officers here to secure the premises and collect additional evidence. We have a warrant to search the entire house. I nodded, unable to speak. As they led Jessica toward the door, she finally looked at me. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw something in her gaze that I couldn't quite identify. Was it rage, remorse, defiance? Or was it something else entirely, a kind of cold calculation, even in the face of arrest? A mind already working on her defense, already strategizing how to minimize her culpability. Then she was gone, escorted out of my house by two uniformed police officers placed in the back of a patrol car and driven away. I stood in my kitchen and watched her leave, and I felt absolutely nothing. Paul arrived at the police station within 2 hours. Detective Johnson had contacted him, informed him that Jessica had been arrested, and asked if he would be willing to provide a formal statement about his experiences. Paul didn't hesitate. He came to the station and sat in an interview room and told the police everything: the pattern of sickness, the coffee that tasted strange, the realization that something was deliberately wrong. The officers showed him the evidence. They showed him the container of arsenic that had been found in Jessica's closet. They showed him the purchase records documenting the arsenic that had been delivered to my house. They showed him the coffee sample, now officially documented and analyzed by the lab, confirmed to contain lethal levels of arsenic. Paul signed his statement, and when he walked out of the interview room, he looked shaken but relieved. He found me in the hallway outside the detective's office. It's really happening, he said. She's really going to face charges for this. Yes, I said, and my voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. How are you feeling? Paul asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but the truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know what I was feeling. Relief, vindication, sadness, anger. All of those things seemed inadequate to describe the complexity of emotions churning in my chest. I'm not sure, I finally said. Detective Johnson came out of his office and approached us. We have enough to proceed with charges, he said. The evidence is solid. The recordings, the physical evidence, Paul's statement, your medical records, doctor. Foster's testimony, it all forms a comprehensive case. We're confident in a conviction. When will the trial be? I asked. It's difficult to say exactly, Detective Johnson said. These things can take weeks or even months to work through the system. But I want you to know that you did the right thing. You gathered evidence, you worked with law enforcement, and you've helped ensure that justice will be served. I watched Jessica being led out of the interrogation room later that afternoon, still in handcuffs, still wearing those same pajamas. She was being transported to the detention center, where she would be held pending bail hearing. She didn't look at me this time. She didn't look at anything. Her eyes were fixed on some point in the middle distance, and her face was completely blank. I stood in the Portland Police Department and watched my daughter being taken away, and I felt the weight of the past 3 months suddenly lift from my shoulders. The nightmare was over. The immediate danger had passed. Jessica was no longer in my house. Jessica was no longer preparing my food and my coffee. Jessica was no longer slowly poisoning me, but in its place came something else, a kind of emotional exhaustion so complete that I could barely stand upright. I felt hollowed out, as if every ounce of energy and emotion and will that I'd been channeling into survival and investigation had simply evaporated now that the crisis had passed. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied or relieved in any clean, simple way. What I felt was numb, completely, utterly numb. Justice had finally been served. My daughter was in custody. The woman who had been deliberately, methodically trying to kill me was now facing serious criminal charges that would likely result in a lengthy prison sentence. And I stood in the hallway of a police station and felt absolutely nothing at all. I didn't know what I was feeling anymore. Perhaps that was the real cost of survival. Not the physical damage of the poison, but the emotional damage of having to accept that the person you created, the child you brought into this world, was capable of such deliberate, calculated harm. Tomorrow I would have to process this. Tomorrow I would have to begin the work of understanding what had happened and why. Tomorrow I would have to start thinking about recovery and healing and moving forward. But today I simply stood there empty and numb and free. It's now September 2025, 8 months after my daughter was arrested. I'm recovering. My hair is growing back slowly but noticeably. The texture is different, thinner, more fragile, but it's their proof that my body is beginning to heal itself. My strength is returning in increments. Some days I can walk to the end of the block without becoming breathless. Some days I can prepare a simple meal without my hands shaking uncontrollably, but my heart is still broken. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from betrayal by someone you love, someone you created, someone who is bound to you by blood and history, and all the complicated threads that tie a parent to a child. It's different from the physical pain of the arsenic. It's different from the exhaustion of months of chronic illness. It's a pain that goes deeper, that touches something fundamental about how you understand the world and your place in it. The trial lasted 6 months. 6 long months of depositions and witness testimonies and evidence presentations. 6 months of sitting in courtrooms, listening to lawyers argue about my life, my poisoning, my suffering. 6 months of watching Jessica sit at the defendant's table, her expression shifting between defiance and indifference. I attended some of the trial, not all of it. Detective Johnson advised me that it might be traumatic, but enough to understand the weight of the evidence being presented. The arsenic container found in Jessica's closet. The purchase records documenting the arsenic that had been delivered to my house. The coffee sample confirmed by the lab to contain lethal levels of arsenic. The recordings of Jessica's evasive responses when I'd asked her directly about the coffee. Paul's testimony about his repeated illnesses following consumption of coffee prepared by Jessica. Dr. Foster's testimony about the chronic arsenic poisoning she'd discovered in my blood. The prosecution was thorough. The defense was inadequate. The verdict, when it finally came on October 3, 2025, was never really in doubt. Guilty, 20 years. No possibility of parole for at least 15. I felt nothing when I heard the verdict. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not even relief exactly, though that was part of it. Mostly I just felt tired. Tired of the whole thing. Tired of thinking about Jessica. Tired of the nightmare. Tired of the weight of everything that had happened. Paul divorced Jessica during the trial. He'd been trying to hold on to some measure of civility throughout the proceedings. But by the time the trial entered its final months, he seemed to understand that there was no point in maintaining the pretense. Jessica had lost everything, her freedom, her marriage, her reputation, her future. I couldn't find it in myself to feel sorry for her, but I also couldn't find it in myself to take joy in her suffering. I think that's when I began to truly understand what had happened. Not just the mechanics of the poisoning or the mechanics of the arrest and trial, but the deeper truth of it. My daughter hadn't just tried to kill me. She had destroyed her own life in the process. Whatever drove her to attempt murder, Whatever rage or resentment or calculation had motivated her actions, it had consumed her completely. And now she would spend the next 20 years, the prime decades of her life in prison, separated from the world, paying for those actions. That's not justice. That's tragedy. Complicated, unavoidable, terrible tragedy. Thomas Henderson comes to visit me regularly. He's been my friend for almost 30 years, and I think he might be the only reason I haven't completely fallen apart in the aftermath of everything. He sits with me in my living room while I learn how to trust again. He listens while I talk about the anger and the fear and the confusion. He doesn't try to fix anything or offer platitudes. He just sits there, present, solid, reliable in a way that reminds me there are still good people in the world. You're going to be okay, he tells me sometimes, and I want to believe him. The thing I've learned to do, the thing that has perhaps been most therapeutic, is cooking for myself. I prepare my own meals now. I buy my own groceries. I stand in my own kitchen and make decisions about what goes into my body, and no one else makes those decisions but me. I make coffee every morning. I grind the beans myself. I prepare it in my own coffee maker. And when I drink it, it tastes like freedom. That sounds dramatic, maybe. But it's true. The simple act of preparing something for myself, of maintaining control over what I consume, has become a kind of meditation. A ritual of reclamation. A daily assertion that I am alive, that I am capable, that I am in control of my own body and my own life. I live alone now. The house is quiet, in a way it wasn't when Jessica was here. There are no footsteps in the hallway at strange hours. There is no one hovering in the kitchen. There is no constant low-level anxiety about what might be in the food I'm eating or the drink I'm consuming. The silence is both peaceful and unsettling. Sometimes I think I prefer it to the alternative. Sometimes I miss having someone in the house, even though that someone was trying to kill me. That's the thing nobody tells you about betrayal. It doesn't just hurt in the moment. It reverberates. It changes how you see the world. It makes you question your judgment, your instincts, your ability to understand other people. I've learned several things in the month since Jessica's arrest. I've learned that family is not always a safe place. I've learned that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty or love or basic human decency. I've learned that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most capable of causing you harm. I've learned that love can be weaponized. A daughter's care can be a mask for murder. Devotion can be a performance masking darker intentions. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. I survived months of poisoning. I survived the trauma of discovery. I survived the fear of living with my own would-be murderer while waiting for the police to make an arrest. I survived having to watch my daughter be taken away by law enforcement. I survived the trial and the verdict and everything that came after. I've learned that survival is possible, even in the darkest circumstances. Even when you think you can't go on. Even when you think the pain is too much to bear. Even when you think you've reached the absolute limit of what a human being can endure. Survival is still possible. There is still hope. Even after the deepest darkness, even after the most profound betrayal, even after months of deliberate, methodical harm, there is still hope. Sometimes I think about Jessica. I wonder what she's thinking about in her prison cell. I wonder if she regrets what she did. I wonder if she thinks about me at all, and if so, what she thinks. Hatred, resentment, indifference. I don't harbor hatred toward her anymore. I'm not sure I can afford to carry that weight, but I also don't forgive her. I think forgiveness is something I'll need to work towards, something that may take years or decades or may never come at all. And I've made peace with that. I don't need to forgive her for my own healing. I just need to move forward. Thomas tells me that I'm stronger for having survived this, that I should be proud of myself. And on good days, I believe him. On bad days, I just feel tired and sad and confused about how a human being, my own flesh and blood, could be capable of such deliberate harm. But I keep going. I prepare my own meals. I brew my own coffee. I walk a little further each day. I gradually reclaim my life day by day, moment by moment. This is the story of a father and a daughter, and a betrayal I never could have imagined. This is the story of attempted murder and survival and the long, difficult road to recovery. This is the story of learning that the people we love most can hurt us most deeply, and that we have to find a way to survive that hurt and keep living anyway. This is my story, and even though it contains darkness and pain and terrible things, it also contains hope. It contains moments of strength and resilience. It contains the simple, profound act of preparing my own coffee and tasting freedom in every sip. I am alive. I survived. And I will continue to survive one day at a time, one cup of coffee at a time, until this nightmare becomes just a memory, painful, yes, but no longer defining. The most dangerous person is the one who reads the fine print, the one who plans carefully, the one who knows exactly what they're doing. But there's something else that's true as well. The most resilient person is the one who survives, the one who finds hope in darkness, the one who learns to trust again even after their trust has been shattered. I am that person now, and I will never forget it. This is my story. A story of family betrayal that shattered everything I believed about trust and love. I lived through poison, both literal and emotional. I survived, and I'm here to tell you, don't be like me. Don't wait months to seek help. Don't ignore the warning signs because you want to believe in family. Don't let love blind you to the truth. When something feels wrong, when the pattern becomes too clear, when the people closest to you act strangely, trust your instincts. Reach out. Get help. Don't suffer alone. I learned that family betrayal can come from the person you created. I learned that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. I learned that God, yes, God was with me even in my darkest moments, guiding me toward truth and justice. And I learned that faith, resilience, and the support of good people can carry you through the impossible. My message to you, if you're experiencing family betrayal, if someone close to you is hurting, you know this, you are not alone. God sees your pain. There is hope. There is justice. There is recovery. These grandpa stories aren't just entertainment. They're warnings. They're lessons. I share these grandpa stories because I want you to learn from my mistakes, not repeat them. Listen to the patterns in people's behavior. Protect yourself. Trust professionals. And never underestimate the darkness that can hide behind a smile. If this resonated with you, if you've experienced family betrayal, if you've survived something impossible, please comment below. Share your story. Let others know they're not alone. Subscribe to our channel for more grandpa stories that teach, inspire, and awaken. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Your presence matters. Next time we'll explore another story. Some details are fictionalized for educational purposes. If certain content isn't for you, that's okay. Choose what serves your well-being. God bless you all.
나도? 그래서 누가 만약에 까마귀 잡고 변신해서 와 잡았다 했는데 날 잡아야 돼. 그렇게 해도 되나? 이렇게 해도 되나요? 못한다. 저 양말 하나 주세요. 빨리 남는 거.
아니 이건 비상용이라서 하나만 하는 거예요.
그럼 가서 양말을. 잠깐만. 지금 저희 계획이 일단 옷집에 가자. 그래서 양말 다른 컬러 양말을 다 사서 묶고 다니는 거야. 괜찮지? 좋다. 일단 가자. 그리고 속이는 거야.